Alrighty, good evening, everyone. This is meteorologist Timmy Albertson here with you guys for tonight's weather chat. We're going to talk about a little bit of precipitation activity that's happening in parts of East Texas and parts of southern Louisiana. And then we're also going to talk about what's going to happen over the next day or so with this very system. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead, folks, and take a little bit of a look over at the radar, shall we? All right. So, as we mentioned last night, there is the possibility for a couple of strong storms down around parts of East Texas and western and southwestern Louisiana. Now, we were never expecting this to be a big severe weather outbreak, and part of the reason, that we're even not necessarily seeing much of the way of strong thunderstorm activity right now is that there was a lot of cloud cover this afternoon across a lot of this area. Why is that a big deal? Well, if you have cloud cover, it can kind of limit the instability in the lower levels. One of the things it can do is prevent those temperatures from rising. Now, we talk about temperature contrast all the time. Again, thunderstorms like it warm air on the bottom, colder air up on top. It allows that warmer air to lift upwards. But if that temperature difference isn't quite as big because, let's say, there were some sneaky clouds that kind of got in the way, well, that does to a degree sometimes limit the instability. Now, there's some other factors that also go into play with this. But what's interesting about this setup here is that it is a setup that is actually favorable for some strong thunderstorms if, let's say, we would have lost some of those clouds earlier on today and those temperatures maybe would have increased just a little bit more. As a matter of fact, taking a look at the temperatures right now in this area, they're generally in the mid 60s. Now, we can have severe weather easily with that temperature, but in this type of a setup, especially given the fact that we're in Texas here, we probably want those temperatures to be a little bit warmer just because those temperatures higher up are also going to be just a little bit warmer. So, all things considered, not necessarily the most favorable low level environment. But what's interesting about this is the wind shear is certainly there. And we've talked about wind shear before. So, let's go ahead and take a look here at the latest weather map here really quickly. At the surface, we'll take a little bit of a look at this, at basically what's happening. So, we got this area of low pressure across western Oklahoma right now. As we head through the overnight, it'll slowly drift its way over towards the Tulsa area. Nonetheless, that area of low pressure is trying to drag this warm front across parts of East Texas going back into Louisiana, but that low pressure is beginning to occlude a little bit. So we'll probably have to wait for maybe a new area of low pressure to develop. But nonetheless, that warm front might still try to track a bit more towards the north. Here's the cold front. That's a good forcing mechanism. Problem is it's a little far away from Houston right now, so some of these storms kind of have to depend on some other localized forcing here. But eventually, that cold front will push through, and that'll kind of take away the severe weather probability across this entire area. But that won't be told a little bit later on. So that's a little bit of a setup there. So again, what we're watching is this area here, south of the warm front. But as you can see, there is quite a bit of cloud cover, as indicated here on these station plots. And overall, you get the idea. All right, let's look a little further up towards the north. At the same time, we have this cold frontal boundary that's trying to work its way through. We got a decent sized high pressure, albeit not overly strong, but it's a high pressure nonetheless. And it is located right now over the Canadian prairies and upper plains. Got this little cold front here that it's trying to push through. We'll get a little bit of assistance from this other cold front, which is attached to a much, stronger area of low pressure, but we won't go into that tonight. So there's that little frontal boundary. So that frontal boundary is actually going to play kind of a little bit of an interesting role later on in the forecast. But in the meantime, there you go. So we have a little bit of a temperature contrast here. We got those two centers of low pressure. And eventually what we're going to see is that frontal boundary trying to drift its way a little bit more towards the east. So before we get to that, though, let's go ahead and talk about that wind shear that right now is present over parts of East Texas and southern Louisiana. Look at the winds here at the surface. All right, folks, these are coming in off the ocean from the southeast. All right, it's right at the surface. Let's go a couple thousand feet above ground level here, and let's take a look at what those wind speeds are, or at least what those wind directions are, let's say at about 15,000 feet or so, coming out of the southwest. All right, you can see those little arrows there, or not, those wind bars. There we go, that's the term. Coming out of the southwest at a pretty decent speed too. So we certainly have directional wind shear. As a matter of fact, the wind shear values around this area are pretty decent, especially if you were wanting, some severe weather. Take a look there. We're easily 60, 65 knot wind shear. But as I mentioned, that cloud cover has kind of limited the low level instability. And one of the ways we can kind of see low level instability when we plot it out is something called a lapse rate, the low level lapse rate, which is the change in temperature with height. Now, the with moisture is not accounted for, it's 9.8 degrees Celsius per kilometer of height. All right, that's how much the temperature drops. But because the atmosphere has moisture in it, it's not always at that. As a matter of fact, it's generally in most cases sits right around 6 degrees or so in what we would consider conditionally unstable. So let's take a look here at our good friends, the low level lapse rates. Those are pretty low. Not even 5 degrees in some spots there. That's what those clouds did. So the thunderstorms that are trying to develop have a little bit of a problem in that they can't because there's not enough low level instability. Now, there is still some instability in the mid levels, and that has helped some of those storms to develop, but they have been a little bit elevated, what we call an elevated thunderstorm, and a little bit higher up there in the atmosphere is where its base is. And again, part of the reason for that is we're not necessarily seeing a lot of that low level instability. So the moisture is there, the wind shear is there, but we just kind of lacking a little bit of that low level instability and a good force. And now that can be overcome by a good forcing mechanism, but our cold front's still pretty far back. So that's part of the reason, again, why we haven't been seeing too much in the way of severe weather activity down around parts of this area. Now, mind you, folks, the atmosphere is still unstable, even a little bit further back to the south and to the west ahead of that cold front. So it'll be interesting to see as we go through the rest of the evening. Again, there is going to be the possibility for maybe a strong storm or two to kind of pop up as we go our way in through the evening hours. So the severe weather probability is not zero, but it's not like a big outbreak probability, if that makes any sense. But it'll be interesting to kind of keep an eye on. All right. Let's go ahead and go back to our weather map here, folks. We're going to talk about this little area of low pressure here. So if we were to go ahead and take a look here at a particular forecast model here, and again, as I say this millions of times before, don't always take an exact model exactly as it is, but for our purposes here tonight, it will help to kind of illustrate it here, what we're talking about with this low pressure system. So as we go into the day tomorrow, there it is, making its way out of Tulsa into the Joplin area of Missouri. You can see that frontal boundary still kind of hanging on here by these little isobars tilted. Don't worry, we're going to take a look at another weather map here that'll have all that labeled. But I just kind of want to show you at least the low pressure itself independently. And as we go through the day tomorrow, that low makes its way over St. Louis and then into Indiana as we head into tomorrow night. And that low pressure will eventually kind of just weaken off a little bit. However, we could see yet another disturbance moving out, and that could help to trigger a new area of low pressure along that frontal boundary. That area of low pressure could maybe intensify pretty decently as we go into the weekend, and there could be some active weather across parts of the Great Lakes and back into New England. So we'll talk more about that tomorrow. Let's go ahead, though, folks, and take a look at our good friends, the WPC. We'll take a look at their map as it will be a little bit more colorful than what I just showed you. So this is going into tomorrow morning. Let's take a look at this here. We'll talk about this. So there's our area of low pressure over southwestern Missouri, heading its way towards St. Louis. That warm front does try to lift a little bit, but again, not the strongest warm front in the world. There's that cold front pushing its way through the Houston area. And again, all this green is precipitation. So what's happening north of this warm front is that we have that warm, moist air being drawn up from the Gulf of Mexico. And of course, it's meeting somewhat of a more stable environment there. So this is more or less just kind of a rain with maybe some embedded thunderstorms. And as we go closer towards, the Great Lakes, we can see there is our second cold front that we took a look at, the one that's slowly trugging its way through parts of the upper mid, or, the central part of the Midwest right now. If I can talk this evening, I have not been able to talk all day today for some reason. Anyways, some of that warm, moist air aloft is being lifted over the cooler air that's in place by that high pressure. Again, not a strong high pressure, but it's enough to get the job done. If we were to take a look over at the latest weather map. And so with that in mind, again, we'll put this into connection here, just in case you might have forgotten. If we zoom out a little bit, here we go. There's that cold front, the one that we were taking a look at. There it is right now through the central part of the Midwest. It's not a fast mover. It's going to kind of slow down a little bit. And as we go into the day tomorrow, there is that cold front. As we head into tomorrow morning, you can see it right there. All right. So we got this frontal boundary to the north of this area of low pressure. So some of that warm, moist air that's being lifted up is making its way over somewhat of a cooler air mass, courtesy of this area of high pressure, which itself is not a strong high pressure, but it's still enough to get the job done. That warmer air gets lifted over the cooler air, condenses and precipitates. And in this case, it could very well end up being some snow across parts of central Michigan and around the Chicago area, especially as we head into the late afternoon hours. Now, as that low pressure does track a little bit more into Illinois, it's possible the surface temperatures could rise a little bit just based on some of that warm air advection. So we may actually see some of that rain and snow, maybe, or some of that snow maybe changing over to rain across parts of lower Michigan and maybe northern Illinois for a little bit as we head into the evening. As we go into the day on Saturday, we can see our low pressure. There we go. We'll animate it one more time. It's still hanging on, but it is noticeably weaker by that point. And this this right here is our next system down here across parts of the deep south. We're going to have our next little upper level system kind of help to push that out, and that will then eventually track its way over towards New England. So again, folks, in weather, everything's connected. So that system that we're seeing right now producing those storms down across Texas and Louisiana will also help to produce some snow up across parts of the lower Midwest as we head into the day tomorrow. So overall, kind of a quiet evening out there. I think we went through a lot for the day today. We'll take one more look over at the radar, see how our storms are doing down in the Texas area. And again, we have thunderstorm activity, don't get me wrong, and there is plenty of moisture, especially in the lower levels, getting brought in here off the Gulf of Mexico. So these are certainly probably some lightning shows and certainly some heavy downpours. But as far as the severe weather is concerned, again, part of the problem is that we have a limited low level instability right now. And again, that we may be able to see one or two of those storms maybe overcoming that. And again, folks, with the amount of wind shear that's there, some of those storms could rotate if they do manage to get themselves a little bit better organized. So certainly that will be interesting to watch as we move our way through the evening. So with that in mind, everyone, I think we've gone through enough for the overnight tonight. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and wrap this video up. We'll be back tomorrow evening, and we're going to talk more about that New England activity we could be seeing over the weekend. We'll talk about that tomorrow evening, so you're going to want to make sure you tune in for that. In the meantime, thank you all very much for taking time to join me here. We'll see you back here tomorrow evening. Take care, everyone, and as always, enjoy the weather.